So it goes without saying that our location on the urban edge puts us at increased risk of fire. And this is something of which I hope and assume every homeowner is cognizant. The recent fire at UCT put this risk into even sharper focus. And while we have no desire to cause unnecessary concern, the reality is that given current low crime levels in the valley, fire is arguably the greatest risk to our homes currently. To expand on this point and to specifically highlight the role we all have to play, I'll now hand over to Val Charlton.
Thank you.
So I'll let you, if you just scroll down with my mouse, then you can move through.
Oh, that's even better.
Well, he'll have to move them as well.
So you're going to move them at the same rate as I'm going to move them, is that right? Okay. So thanks, it's really nice to be here. I think I was asked to talk a little bit about this kind of material, but when I went onto your very good website, I noticed that it was already there. And I thought, well, what is the point of giving you information that you've already got? So I decided to do something a little bit different, which is to give you a little bit of information that I worked on around comparing what happened in the last European fire season and the potential for what can happen to us now. You think it's the mouse? It's not. I haven't used a mouse in 20 years. Okay, there we go. So you'll see, I don't know how well you can see the water firing backwards on this, but I think one must realize that we've been very lackadaisical about our fire risk in the Western Cape on the whole. And while Knysna was the first wake up, I think what happened in Cape Town last year was maybe a second wake up, although we can potentially go back to 2000 where we had the first fire. This is Portugal. And you can see these firefighters are busy running away from the fire. And I think you have to recognize that potentially we are in for that in future. And I don't think for a moment we can think that this is not going to happen in the Western Cape. And why I say that is because all the statistics go to show that it's Mediterranean ecosystems that are bearing the brunt of what is happening. And we're right there. This was a headline. I happened to choose it because the guy's name was Ben van der Merwe, and I thought he has to be a South African. But you can see quite clearly here that it's not the vegetation that's burning, it's the houses. And the reason for that is partly because of ember attack, which is exactly what happened at UCT and which is potentially what you are prone to in the area of the CRD. This was a map that I got some friends in Europe to put together. These were some of the comments. I'm going to flip through this very quickly because I actually want to get to the end and hopefully prompt you to make. Are you keeping up? It's taking a while. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I haven't looked at the screen. I've been looking here and thinking it's happening here. So one of the things that I looked at in this project that I was doing was, how do our wildland urban interface compare with those in Europe? Specifically, not America, not Australia, not Chile, but Europe. Because I believe that that's probably our closest areas around the Mediterranean and Europe. Am I going to have to wave at you? Yeah. Is that what you're going to do? Okay, sorry. This is, I think, was Greece. Next slide. Some of you might recognize that slide. I know someone at the back will. That's Glencairn. Very little difference. How do our fuels and our fuel loads compare? I think this was Spain. Next slide. Well, I'm sure you'll recognize that area. And specifically here, what's important is to look at what we call fingers of vegetation. What we're seeing specifically is that fingers of vegetation are what is really helping fires to penetrate right deep into communities. So I'm hoping that you as the CID are going to perhaps do something about it. Invasives are definitely playing a role here, but all vegetation burns. It's what you can do about avoiding it. Next slide. This could be anywhere. But again, here you see these fingers of vegetation and then embers and then fire starting. Don't think for a moment that this couldn't be us this summer, just a month from now, because it could very easily. This is Greece. Vegetation you can see in the front, very similar to our fynbos, but at the back we've probably got pines, maybe cypress, stuff like that. Very similar to some of the vegetation that we've got, especially invasives. Next slide. And then we all know about that kind of fuel. And I think it's worth noting that the reality is that any home is just fuel for a fire. It doesn't make any differentiation, and that is definitely the case with informal settlements. Once a fire starts burning in a home, what it does is it propagates that fire from home to home. People think that this wildfire comes down like a dragon and sweeps through and burns everything. It doesn't work that way at all, actually. So the next question I was asking was, are citizens ready for the possible catastrophe? This was Turkey. This was Cape Town. And I'm going to carry on moving on quickly. Our property is defendable. I think the one advantage that we've got here compared to Europe is a lot of our homes are younger. What I've seen in Europe is that some of the properties are so old, the roofs are not secure, there's a lot of cracked tiles, and ultimately that leads to them not being as defendable as a lot of our properties are here. But then this was Murdoch Valley a few years ago, where the fire came straight down one of those fingers in a ravine where the pines were, various other things. It came straight down the valley, downhill, which is unusual. It's going to potentially what can happen here. And it actually ended up jumping the main road and ending up at the sea. Took a couple of houses out in between. The people along this fire break had done an excellent job of fireproofing their side of the fire break in a lot of areas, but there were these very definite ravines that were catastrophic. So for South Africa, what's predicted by the South African Weather Service this year, I haven't been able to get the update for the months of January to March yet, but the expectation is already a 0.5 degree to 1 degree warmer in December. If we end up with any of these heat dome situations, temperatures could go up substantially. So really moving towards the end now, why do some homes burn and others don't? This is an example of a property in Knysna. It sits on the top of the mountain. You'd think, well, it would burn, but the reality is it was well defended. So everything burnt around it. You don't see them anymore because they're just ash, but there was houses below and houses on either side, and yet that house was untouched. And that tells us a lot. We learn more from what didn't burn than what actually did burn. And this is a good example of having taken the steps to defend your home. Here's a couple more. Wooden houses are not necessarily a problem, provided the defensible space has been taken care of and you've paid attention to the roof. The roof is really very important, and there are other homes you can see there the same thing. What we have discovered is that aluminium gutters are far, far, far better than PVC gutters, because the PVC gutters melt, and then from there they propagate the fire in your building. So it's worth noting if you're building or if you're looking at renovating at all. You can see the gutters. The term clean out your gutters is really one of the most important things you can do. It's so basic, it doesn't cost anything, just do it. Because embers, which are firebrands thrown off from the fire, well ahead of the fire, kilometers ahead of the fire sometimes, has been proven worldwide to be the cause of houses burning down. Okay, so moving ahead very quickly now to my challenge to you as a CID. You do have the opportunity to do a proper risk assessment in this community. You're a very active crowd of people, and there are very definitely things that you could do to put a risk assessment together and then take steps to reduce your risk. Definitely look at all the fuels below the fire break. A fire break has never stopped a fire. Fire break is just a place to fight the fire from. So don't think, oh, well, there's a fire there, we're going to be cool, because you're not. The embers are going to blow into the community and straight over the fire break. So really look at those properties. I'm sorry if anybody's house is shown up here, that's not the intention, but below the fire break is a real problem. We see it all around Cape Town, not just here. And then something that you could perhaps do if you haven't thought about it is look at evacuation planning. And I would strongly urge you to do this. It's very easy to say, okay, well, I'm going to stay and defend. But you know, an approaching fire roaring along is probably one of the scariest things that you can live through. If you have young children, you should evacuate. If there are elderly people, try and find out where they are and help them. And I would strongly urge you to look as a group at an evacuation plan. Even if you were just to mark out exit routes out of your community, it would be a huge help in the case of an emergency. Look at turnaround circles, because you've got big vehicles coming in, you can end up with a traffic jam. There's lots of different things that you can look at. And then think about a refuge area. If you had to evacuate, where would you go? Does everybody know this? Is there some way of communicating this to your community at large? Can you do a trial run? It's a great thing to do a mock-up and actually pretend you've got a fire and mobilize and test it out. I would strongly urge you to do that. And yes, I mean, if you want any help, I'm very happy to come and advise. And then just to close off, I'm open to any questions, but I know I'm sort of in the middle of a meeting.
No, that's fine. I think if anyone's got questions for you, we should take them now while it's
all right.
in people's minds.
But I mean, I think that the reality is that we live in a world of risk. You know, you've talked about the fact that you've got your security risks under control and you actually are living with the risk. And really, this is what I'm saying you have to do here as well. The fire risk is not going to go away, ever. You live in a fire-prone ecosystem. You need to learn to live with that risk and manage your risk. And that's me. Thank you very much. And I hope I put the fear of God in here, actually.
Thank you, Val. Does anybody in the room have any questions for Val?
Yeah, Guy's bound to say something.
Guy, if you let us know what the question is, then I'll repeat it for the benefit of those on the Zoom call.
Thank you, Ms. Charlton.
Pleasure, Dr. Preston.
Could you say anything about the legal risk if you haven't protected taken the protection measures on your property and the fire spreads to other properties?
So the question is whether Val can talk a little about the legal risk if you haven't taken the appropriate measures to protect your property and the fire spreads from yours onto neighbouring properties.
So that's quite an interesting one, and not a short answer. So from a National Felt and Forest Fire Act perspective, which really doesn't apply at a residence level, the Act is quite clear. It said if a fire can start, or a felt fire can start or spread from your property, then you have to take steps to reduce that risk. If a fire starts on your property and spreads to another property, and then another and another and another, then the place where the property where the fire started is responsible for the damages and costs for all of those properties. Now that's the National Felt and Forest Fire Act. There's another piece of legislation in terms of the community fire bylaw, which you might want to put into a newsletter, which talks about the penalties that you might pay from the City of Cape Town point of view if you have not maintained your property from a fire bylaw perspective. So that's any vacant plots, those that are perhaps overgrown with invasives because they're classified as a problem. and there's legislation covering those. And negligent actions that you may do, if you go and start a briar fire and it gets out of control, then potentially you're going to be responsible. The other thing is, I've been working with insurance, as I'm with Guy, I've been working with the insurance industry for 20 years now, trying to get them to actually do something and incentivize and disincentivize homeowners. The attitude of homeowners has been for a very long time, oh, well, you know what, if we burn down, the insurance company's going to pay out, and, you know, so what? But you know what? It's not going to happen much longer. They are really sitting up and taking notice now, and you will find that you're either penalized or, I mean, what's happening in the States now is insurance companies have just pulled out in certain areas in California. They've said, you know what, we're just not going to have insurance here anymore. So I don't think we'll get to that point, but there's definitely going to be penalties. Does that answer your question? Got more?
Yes, it does. If I could, just a second point, maybe just to raise the importance of controlled burns, where we can do that, because quite often you get negative reaction from community members to having controlled burns, but if we don't have those, we are going to have worse fires across the peninsula.
So yes, the question was just to talk a little bit about controlled burns and why people quite often feel negatively. In reading your slides, Val, I was really struck, particularly given the times we're living in now, by this quote that it's like a vaccine. A small fire is a vaccine for the biggest fire. We're acting like an anti-vaccine society. So while most landowners will happily welcome a fire crew coming in to save their forest from encroaching wildfires, controlled burns when there's no apparent danger is a very different story. So you know, I thought that was very timely.
Yeah, so prescribed burning or controlled burning is very necessary. We don't do enough of it, and the reason why we don't do enough of it, especially in the metro, is because of air pollution regulations and the number of days that it's safe to actually burn. So, you know, really what we're asking is that you support sand parks, especially when they want to do a prescribed burn in your area. Please don't say, oh, but it's my day to do the washing, because that's what actually happens. You know, just put up with it. Just close your windows and put on your environmentally unfriendly air conditioning and just put up with it. The guy that said this up top around the vaccine is a guy called Mark Castelnau, who I've worked with in Spain and Portugal. He's very, very, very qualified and has faced probably some of the worst fires that we've ever had. And his comment is very true. You know, I've always likened it to protecting against a burglary. You want to protect your home against a burglary, and you actually do something about it. But then when it comes to protecting your house against fire, you expect someone else to do it. Oh, the city of Cape Town are sending its firefighters. That's crazy. And they're not going to do it either, because you're putting them at risk. You know, so we need to think, why should they put themselves at risk to protect your property when you've done nothing? And that goes back down to, again, the fuels that are around your property. Sorry, I'm getting carried away now. Get quite passionate about this. Keith, I think, had a question. I don't know whether we've answered.
I was wondering, Kinley from Fisher, I've known you for 55 years.
Yeah, it's quite a long time, eh?
How did you get into this?
I blame that man at the back.
I'm going to suggest that you take that offline at the end of the meeting, so that we can get our business of the evening done in time. But
yeah.
Thank you, Val. That was fantastic. Great. And I'm hoping that you can maybe hang around. I'm only going to speak for a few more minutes.
I'll hang around and I'll take any questions, and you'll take it from there.
Lovely.
Yeah?
Thank you very much indeed. Right.